Today on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, we're going to be talking about how eradicating rats from small island communities can actually protect the ocean. It's kind of weird, right? You'd never think that protecting the ocean would require eradicating a land animal. But we're going to talk about why that land and sea interaction is so important in conservation on this episode. So let's get started. Hey there, I am Andrew Lewin. I'm the host of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It's a podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about an article I found on one of my favorite sites, Manga Bay News. I'll put a link in the description below, where we're going to talk about small island states and how land and sea interactions and conservation measures actually help the ocean and just conservation in general. And you're probably wondering, well, yeah, that actually makes sense, Andrew. Why are you even talking about this? Well, it seems as though we've gotten away from it. Scientists, researchers, conservationists, a lot of the times when we do marine protected area plans or land protected area plans, they're approached differently because they are different realms and they are drastically different. When you're looking at a land and you're looking at protecting land, you have a boundary that you can actually put in place. When you're protecting the marine realm or even the freshwater realm, you can't put a boundary. You can't put a physical boundary, so it can only go so far. You know, marine protected areas can protect against extractive sort of disturbances like overfishing or fishing in general, mining, oil and gas, things like that. But you can't stop water pollution, right? Because there's no physical boundaries to stop that pollution from coming in. It's just based on currents and winds and seeing where that water pollution will go. You can stop the water pollution, but that is a separate type of regulation. It's a separate type of protection measure in the sort of the conservation tool belt, let's just say. But when you have something on land, you can protect that. You can actually put a physical boundary so people can't enter or things can't enter. And so that makes a big difference. There are other differences, but those are probably the biggest difference, the different differences. And so we're just going to kind of leave it at that. But the article that I want to cover today was from sort of a perspective piece in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, in PNAS, I think is the how you pronounce sort of the acronym for it. And this article really looked at about 20 to 30 years of data that looked at how land and sea conservation measures were used to actually protect the ocean and the land. And they looked at animals that linked that land and sea interaction, like seabirds and crabs that would start their life on land or live most of their life on land and go into the ocean to reproduce. You see that a lot in Costa Rica. But the island that they used was Palmyra Atoll. And Stuart Stanton was, at the beginning of the article, they talked about how he went to this atoll in 2004 and found that there weren't many seabirds. And when he started to do some exploration around the island, he noticed that there were a lot of eggs and even just seabird carcasses on the ground, as well as crabs. They're just dead crabs. And so they were all from rat predation. Now, how did the rats get there? They're an invasive species. Those species got there. The rats got there from military ships that would come to the island and either set up bases or visit the island. And so the rats got out and they would just take advantage of this new land and new food source for them, and they would just wreak havoc on the populations there. And when they went in to eradicate the rats, and when they were successful in eradicating the rats, they noticed that the seabird population was coming back. And when the seabird population came back, the crab population came back, and they started to notice that a lot of the ecosystem processes that were happening started to come back because the rats weren't affecting the birds, they weren't affecting the crabs, they weren't affecting the ecosystem functions, and they started to come back and they started to get a lot of the same things that they had before. So that's a more productive ocean. That's a more productive land because, you look at seabirds will spend some of their time on land resting and reproducing, but then most of their time is spent in the oceans where they can actually where they can actually feed. And so that's a very important part of their life cycle. And so they go back and forth. And as they're on their way back, they'll let their waste in the coastal oceans. They'll let their waste in on land, and that becomes part of the food web, and that becomes part of the productivity on both land and sea. So that not having the seabirds population there, or not having the same number, can affect the productivity on both land and sea. So that's one of the major examples that they use throughout the articles. And it's a really interesting article, as most of the articles in Manga Bay uses. If you ever have a chance, please feel free to just start to look around the original articles. I'm not sponsored by them, but they always make me feel good about reading this type of stuff, because they provide a lot of optimism like this, and the pictures are actually quite amazing. But like this article, they do talk a lot about this type of stuff. And so in the paper, the authors identify 6 characteristics that can help strengthen the land-sea connectivity, because once you strengthen that connectivity, you end up having better conservation measures. And so they say that these 6 characteristics can be used as a guide for conservation efforts. So we're looking at precipitation, elevation, vegetation cover, soil hydrology, oceanographic productivity, and wave energy. So all of this can help strengthen the land-sea connectivity. And in the article, Scott Fitzpatrick, an expert in the archaeology of islands and coastal regions at the University of Oregon, who wasn't involved in the paper, said that the piece highlights the importance of looking at islands and conservation from a ridge to reef perspective. That means from the top of the land to the reef. The importance of looking at particularly when it comes to the negative impacts of invasive species. However, he did say that the paper itself is decoupled from crucial anthropological and archaeological, or even paleo-environmental perspectives, despite the authors acknowledging the importance of harnessing traditional ecological knowledge. So essentially what they're saying, while they recognize that our understanding of land-sea interactions across the globe spans multiple knowledge systems, including long-standing human knowledge from island communities through diverse perspectives, there really is no tacit acknowledgement of what these perspectives are, how they are known, and how any future analysis would need to incorporate coordination and cooperation within these communities. So essentially what that paragraph is saying is we need to include indigenous communities within this whole process, because their culture involves protection of the land and the sea. They, from my understanding, from the readings and from speaking to some people who are more experts than I will ever be, is that indigenous communities will live one with nature, because nature provides them with the food, the housing, the protection that they need. And so they in turn give back to that. They protect. They don't get greedy. Once they get greedy, they probably have stories that talk about how people who are greedy get punished by Mother Nature, or whatever it's called in their culture. And I think that's really important to take note, because oftentimes, or even in the past, we'll see conservation organizations go into an island or go to an island and say, hey, to the community, we're going to help protect your oceans because we want to protect the biodiversity of the oceans, 30 by 30 and so forth. But this is how you do it. But they don't take into account the traditional ecological knowledge that the indigenous communities have and how they have been probably successfully protecting their land, their sea, their fresh water, so that they can live for centuries, or that they've been living for centuries. So including this, the indigenous communities is a huge win. And so that needs to continue. That needs to be, right from the get-go of a conservation process, that needs to happen. So hopefully that will happen in the future. So that's the acknowledgement of this piece that says that, we need to include more indigenous communities in our talks and more traditional ecological knowledge that happens in this area. And so the other major piece here is the invasive species part. Invasive species can, in small island communities especially, have been able to run rampant along a lot of these islands, especially when you look at rat species, especially when you look at, in this case, there was on a French an atoll in the French Polynesia. They said they tried to get rid of yellow crazy ants. Just imagine what that is. And rats both have wreaked havoc with the atoll's native wildlife. So in April 2022, this past April, conservationists also launched an Island Ocean Connection Challenge. So not only from getting rid of invasive species, but looking at a program focused on restoring and rewilding about 40 island ecosystems to benefit islands, their surrounding marine environments, and local communities by 2030. So experts have identified specific islands in the Galapagos, Palau, and two places that could benefit from restored land-sea connections. Rats and other introduced species have invaded both of these islands. So an eradication program will be implemented for this to be able to ensure that these small island communities can get back to what they were before the invasive species entered or arrived, and talk and just get back to a point where they can protect biodiversity. Small island communities, although they're small, they tend to be very unique in that they protect a lot of biodiversity, especially in tropical areas. You're looking at Palau, Pacific Islands, really, the Galapagos Islands. Those are special areas that need to be protected. And so going back to the land-sea interaction from a conservation perspective is going to be extremely important to ensure that we actually just continue with protecting biodiversity, continue to take simple matters and put in, not necessarily simple matters, but take complex matters, and put simple measures going back to what we should have been doing in the first place, looking at land-sea interactions in like an island community that's really, really small, working with indigenous communities, eradicating invasive species, and getting back to these natural islands that were so productive and so diverse in their biodiversity. We need to continue to have those. And that's really, really important. We're in a time where we're in a major extinction. And so to do any kind of protection of species is going to be extremely important, whether it be on land, ocean, or fresh water. And doing all three of those realms and including those realms in the conservation plans together as a unit or a number of units is really important. So that's it for today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you want to hear the past episodes that we've done, you can obviously look at the channel, but I do have an audio podcast called How to Protect the Ocean. We have over 1,400 episodes. I'll put a link to the Apple Podcast, the Spotify, but if you listen to any podcast apps, we're pretty much on all of them, so you can check that out. Just look at How to Protect the Ocean, and of course we're going to be posting here, so please subscribe for more episodes. Hit that notification bell to get notifications, but also just share with your friends if you think that they will benefit from listening to this or watching this. So thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.